And welcome to the Redeeming Work podcast. This is a monthly podcast produced by the Institute for Faith and Culture and Coral Ridge Ministries. I'm Rob Pacienza, a senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, founder of the Institute, and president and CEO of Coral Ridge Ministries. My co-host is Chad Volkert. Chad is a global solutions leader living in South Florida, member of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, and a contributor and leader for the Institute for Faith and Culture. And Chad, today, for the Redeeming Work podcast, we are joined by a good friend, Dr. Stephen Mansfield. He is a New York Times bestselling author. He is a global leader when it comes to thinking through leadership solutions for our current cultural moment. He also happens to be a senior fellow for the Institute for Faith and Culture, an ambassador for the Center for Christian Statesmanship. Stephen, that's just wearing me out, naming all of your titles.
Stop, please stop.
But Stephen, on behalf of Chad and I, thank you for coming on the Redeeming Work podcast.
My privilege. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Stephen. And Rob, looking forward to the podcast today and talking about, the virtues within the workplace and how to lead through faith and purpose. And Stephen has such deep expertise in this area.
Absolutely. And that really goes back to the name of the podcast, Redeeming Work. We don't believe that work was an answer to the fall. It was created before the fall. But because of the fall, because of sin, work is not a joy. Work is not often a delight, but in fact, it's a burden. But it's the responsibility of the people of God to call every person who follows Jesus Christ to embrace their sacred calling and to do exactly what we're talking about on today's podcast, to redeem our work.
Well, maybe we can jump into it, Stephen. Thinking about your book, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, you talk a lot about the timeless virtues of masculinity and men in the modern world, but there seems to be a lot of parallels between that and what business leaders need to be on the lookout for and be handling in the workplace. Could you share maybe a little bit of your thoughts there?
Chad, I am stunned by the parallels between working with business leaders and working with men. It's unbelievable the way there's bleed over. When I work with men, let me just start this way. I'm trying to get them to own a sense of destiny. They were made for a purpose. I'm trying to get them to step up and own their responsibilities, own the field assigned to them, take responsibility for what's going on in the realm that they've been given. I'm trying to get them to help each individual, their wife, their children, others that might be under their influence, to flourish, to arise to their destiny, to arise to their purpose. And when I step into the business realm, it's almost exactly the same thing. Own your purpose, own what you're there for, help others flourish, take responsibility for your field. By the way, get whole yourself so you can help others towards wholeness, and define success and achievement brilliantly and wisely in an inspirational fashion. So there's almost a direct parallel. It's the same process almost, and you'd be surprised of how many people who are in business who haven't really owned their own sense of purpose, their own sense of calling, and therefore it doesn't translate into their company and what they're responsible for.
Yeah. So let's talk about the leaders that you work with, particularly in the Christian realm. And you really emphasize the power of a personal story. And part of a person's personal story is being able to articulate and own not only the good parts, but the bad parts. Mm-hmm. Not only emphasizing the successes, but the failures as well. Mm-hmm. You've worked with plenty of leaders that have experienced great crisis, a crisis of faith, a moral crisis, a situation where it seems like their world is turned upside down. Mm-hmm. How can a leader turn even their failures into a powerful part of their story that they ultimately use to leverage their influence and their impact?
Probably the best way for me to answer that is to say that the Greek word for the word equipped describes the exact place where a bone has broken but is healed. Because where it heals, it's stronger than it was originally. Mm. So the problem with a lot of leaders is they think if they only present their strengths and never talk about their failures or their broken places, or never get healed and thus bring that to their audience, so to speak, those they lead, that they'll be stronger. But the fact is, it's where God has healed them, where they've been broken, where they've been damaged, that can be their greatest strength. So a lot of times I'm working with leaders to say, you failed in business and then you became a pastor. Well, you don't have to hide that that. Talk about that. Talk about what led to that. Or you had a season when you and your wife were separated, perhaps, and so now there's been this healing. In other words, right there where the breaks are is where there can be their greatest strength. So a lot of the power of a leader is bringing the whole of what God has done to their lives to impact those who are following them.
Yeah. Is there a leader that comes to mind, particularly a Christian leader that has experienced failure, that has really turned that failure into the good of what they're trying to do in leadership?
I'm not trying to dodge your question, but I can't talk about most of those. I can't think of one that would really be public.
Even one that you haven't, but somebody you've read, somebody you've written on, somebody you've really studied.
Yeah, I think probably the one I am most impressed with, and of course I've written a book about it, so I'm not trying to sell books, but Arthur Guinness. Arthur Guinness was a man who was a devoted Christian, started this Guinness beer company, but was frustrated. He didn't have a Christian vision for what he was doing in his company. He just had kind of a Sunday kind of religion. And then John Wesley came along, and John Wesley began to give him a vision for what he could do in the marketplace. And John Wesley's famous phrase was, "Make all you can, save all you can, give all you can to the glory of God." Well, it may sound simple to us today, but it gave Guinness this vision for his company, and he transformed his company, began to use it to address poverty in England and in Ireland, and of course, changed history. So that's an example of a guy who was lacking a full biblical vision. Somebody gave that to him, and it caused him to roar to the fore. And so there's a more historical example of that.
That's good.
Maybe staying on famous individuals. You've written about so many. Os Guinness, you think about Winston Churchill, George Washington, amazing books. Thinking about, instead of their failures, is there one or two virtues that you have seen in historical leaders that have transformed this world that is really lacking in today's business leaders, or that should be really focused on more to take their organizations and their people to the next level?
To give you an example from the life of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill battled depression his entire life. His father hated him, and there were other problems, and he battled depression his entire life. In fact, when he was Prime Minister of England, he didn't want to stay at the White House in a room with a balcony on it. He was afraid a depression might hit, and he might throw himself off. Well, you're thinking, how could this guy be Prime Minister? But that gave him such compassion that it fueled those powerful speeches he gave. It fueled his compassion for the average soldier in the field. Remember that he would say to them, look, if this empire lasts 1,000 years, they will say this was our finest hour. We're going to fight on the beaches. We're going to fight on the landing grounds. We need everybody from the barkeep to the janitor to do their jobs. And he would get down into the lives of the people and talk to them. And how did he feel that humanness at that level? Because he had fought in the dark night of the soul. So he was asked later in his life, how did you make such powerful speeches? He said, I felt every demon coming in the night, and I knew what demons my people were dealing with. And I think that's a virtue that a lot of leaders today need to be in touch with the human story, the human struggle. What are their workers? What are their people grappling with? What are they wrestling with? And how can you speak to that and bring inspiration from your own story?
It's amazing.
Stephen, when maybe our audience hears this idea of faith-driven purpose and calling and virtue, they go, that sounds good. But you don't understand. I've got boards to report to. Mm-hmm. I've got a bottom line that I've got to meet every month and every quarter. I think we have an opportunity at the Institute and through resources like the Redeeming Work podcast to really change the narrative that embracing faith-driven calling and purpose and virtues actually doesn't diminish productivity, but it actually increases it. How can the leader that is a Christian, they're in church every Sunday, in private, they believe everything the three of us believe, how can they be motivated to take their faith, to take their virtues, and allow it to be expressed in a way that they're motivating their team, inspiring others, and ultimately accomplishing everything their business sets out to accomplish?
Yeah, I'm reminded of Mother Teresa, who said, preach the gospel and use words if you must. We don't want to release into the marketplace a lot of people in business who talk their faith all the time but aren't doing a great job on the job.
Right.
In fact, we believe that being devoted to Jesus, praying about what we do, using our calling, using our gifts in the service of the marketplace, it makes us better at what we do. So, yeah, I want Christian business people to be public about their faith and open about it. But the real mark, the real thing that ought to distinguish them is the excellence with which they serve, the quality of what they do, the devotion they do it with, the inspiration they have for it. And I think that's what's going to make a massive difference. When I go in often and am asked to fix situations where there are a lot of faith-based people in a company, but the CEO is saying, "No, I'm happy for them to be there, but they're not producing a lot." And I have to go in there and help those Christians to understand, what the mark of who we are as Christians in the marketplace should be an astonishing level of expertise and excellence and productivity.
I'm glad you used that word excellence, because I think for some Christians it's a dirty word.
Yeah.
It's a word that belongs in the secular realm or with the world, but we believe in a God-centered excellence.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, let's clarify. We're not talking about a man-centered excellence where we're getting the glory. It's a God-centered, Christ-glorifying excellence that we should be at the top of our game, the top of our industries. We should produce the best work. We should be the best at hiring, the best at firing, the best at developing our people. Ultimately for the glory of God.
I was just with a bunch of generals, and they, people of faith at a certain level, but I said, what is the core military, up at West Point, up at the military academies, what's the core lesson you're trying to teach these young cadets? And they looked around, they said, well, there's really no other way to say it, servant leadership. Wow. And I thought, wait a minute, you didn't make that up. That came from our scriptures. That came from the example of Jesus. And they said, yeah, we're aware of that, but we're actually starting to call it servant leadership, and we're trying not to make it too religious because of issues of First Amendment and military. But the bottom line is, they said that's really leadership greatness, is servant leadership. Well, here again, we Christians should be in the marketplace. We should be in our corporations. We should be serving, and then we won't have a concern about being vainglorious or somehow exalting ourselves, because we'll be so about serving others that self kind of moves to the side. I don't know of any company that wouldn't want somebody who is radically committed to servant leadership, which is exactly what Jesus has called us to.
Well, and that seems a lot to look like transparent leadership, right? I mean, if you understand where your leader stands, whether you agree with them on everything, in the midst of this moral chaos, I have to believe that leaders that are leading through faith as a servant leader are able to really bring the people along on the journey, knowing that they have their best interests at heart. I mean, do you see examples of how leaders are doing that effectively within the workplace?
Yes, very much. The fact is that the Christian worldview means that we look at an individual as a person with a mind and a body, but also a spirit. They've got a calling, they've got a purpose. And wise leaders kind of reach into the soul of a person and call out their best, call out a higher vision. You may not necessarily be discipling them in Jesus within the company, but you definitely recognize this person has a calling, they have certain gifts. I'm going to summon that. I'm going to inspire that. I'm going to build on that. So that Christian worldview creates the very way you relate to those that you're working with. And smart leaders do this. In fact, I sat in a Chick-fil-A seminar not too long ago, and that's exactly what they were talking about. Basically, they were saying everybody's got a destiny. Everybody's got a spirit. Everybody's got certain gifts. Your job is to cinch their sense of destiny and purpose and calling and inspiration to the purposes of the company, making them better along the way. And I think that's the essence of Christian leadership.
Fascinating.
Stephen, in your writings, you talk about the archetype of the king. The king. Let me pause there. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
All right. Let me hold on one more sip.
Yeah.
Take your time, man.
How are your allergies? Are they getting any better?
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, mine kicked up in the last week.
Well, the fires.
Is that what,
that's what it said. The
and I don't
fires
normally have
I could tell something was going on down here. Yeah.
Even my voice, the last couple of days, is like a little raspy, more than normal.
Okay. Stephen, in your writings, you talk about the archetype of the king that provides order and direction in a state of chaos. I don't think it's any surprise to our listeners that we are facing a state of great moral crisis in our culture. How does a Christian business leader play that role, fulfill their role as the king, without, on the one hand, alienating their employees, but on the other hand, not giving in to the pressures of culture?
Yeah, it's a great question because we tend to think of ruling and presiding as somehow being arrogant and being dominating. But the fact is, the first thing that happens, and I've coached so many leaders in this area, is that you've got to know that you are called here for such a time as this. A Christian knows, I'm here for such a time as this. God put me in this position. The next thing that happens is a phrase I use all the time with leaders, the big calm. Crises can be happening in the world, challenges for the company, but you know you're here. You know Jesus is Lord, even if you're not preaching that, openly in the company. And you are calm because you know you're called to be in that situation and that you're going to handle it. So stay calm. Know God's in charge and trust God that he's given you the gifts for the moment. And then the next thing, too, is to realize that people have emotions and you're going to have to address those emotions. So speak in terms of inspiration. Speak in terms of freedom of fear. I would say be Churchillian in a sense and speak to people where they are calling out their best. All of those are functions of kingship. We tend to think of kingship mainly as the exercise of authority, but it's about radiating certain things. I was a lover of Queen Elizabeth II. I have photographs up on my wall in my office. She inspired me, and part of it was her sheer presence. And I paid attention to when she would go into a place, she wouldn't say a whole lot, but just being there, things changed because she was royal, because she was calm, because she was a Christian, because she had that royal presence, and situations transformed, lastingly, just because she was there. So that authoritative presence that comes from knowing that you're God's, knowing that he's got you, knowing that you are equal to the moment and calling others to their best in that moment and driving off fear, that is the essence of what true kingship is, not just ordering people around and getting things done to serve yourself.
Oh, that's good.
Well, and you think about that, right? Leaders, many times people view leaders as having to preach, command the room, make sure everybody knows their opinion and the direction that the ship needs to sail. But you've written in a number of books about the power of questions. And so as you think about leadership and the executives in the workplace, could you share maybe a little bit about what intentional questions should leaders be asking their teams that bring forth trust, transparency, that bring out really the ultimate calling of not only the organization, but also of that kingship type leadership?
This is a huge area because the questions a leader asks is a kind of language. It's a communication to the company. And I'll tell you, most leaders don't have the courage to ask the questions that need to be asked. Right? So when something's going wrong in a company, it's usually because the leader hasn't asked the most productive, the most fruitful, the most revealing questions. And so they've got to have the courage to ask the tough questions. Will you ask the questions that take us wherever we need to go? Why is this failing? What did we do wrong? Did we launch the wrong initiative? Have we put a lot of money into the wrong computers? Do we have the wrong people in place? Did I mess up? I'm willing to ask the dock worker, did the CEO mess up? And I want the CEO to want that question answered even more fully. So to ask the tough questions and to ask the wise questions and then pay attention to the answers. The reality is, and I'm sorry to state it negatively, most high-level leaders are afraid of full answers to tough questions because it seems like an indictment. Just the other day, I was helping a university, and one of the officials said, "We don't want so-and-so, this certain senior executive." They take tough questions as an accusation. And so that university is having a very, very difficult time as a result. But in another situation I'm thinking of, the CEO, the leader, is fearless, always wanting more information, always wanting the questions answered. Ask a guy who just drops off the milk in the cafeteria. He says, anything you see here? He's always asking the tough questions and willing to respond. And the organization is healthy as a result.
Well, and I would just point out, it's important to ask those questions, but it's more important to actually listen to the answers.
Yes.
And then take action on
Yes.
that. We see far too many leaders in today's world, they feel that they can ask some questions and then the teams say, well, they heard me, but they didn't do anything about it, right?
Yeah. I was in a corporate cafeteria just not too long ago and got my drink of choice, Diet Coke. And because it came from one of the dispensers, it was a little flat. And I pushed it away and somebody said, "Is there anything wrong?" I said, "It's a little flat, but it's fine. We're done. We got to go." The next day, I get an email from the CEO. He had gone in there like he does on a regular routine, asked, is anything gone wrong? It wasn't just that I was a guest. Yeah, we had some people complain that the soft drinks were flat. He got in there, got on his knees, started looking at the machine with them. They decided to replace the machine, let me know the next day, and when I went in there that day, it was fixed. Now, that's a guy who's like, whatever the problem is, in the men's room, in the locker room, on the shipping dock, I want to know and I want to address it. And I was impressed with that. And that organization's thriving because of that kind of culture.
It's great.
Sorry. Almost done. Stephen, if people are listening, they might go, this is great for those that own their own business. They are the C-suite leader. And they might be a senior manager, but they feel like they have very little influence or opportunity to really change culture, particularly in their workplace. For the Christian, that might be struggling. You know, we look at the companies that don't seem to be learning their lesson. Off camera, we were talking about Bud Light and Cracker Barrel, for instance.
Yes.
You're a Christian senior level executive, but doesn't seem like you can change much. What's your encouragement? What's your calling to them in a culture that continues to go woke? And continues to embrace DEI and other theories that are certainly antithetical to the Christian message?
Well, first of all, just at a devotional level, pray about everything that you're responsible for. Ask God for wisdom. You don't have to communicate that you're doing that within the company. That may not be appropriate, but you want to ask God to give you wisdom and grace and understanding and knowledge and inspiration for your situation. The second thing is bear in mind that culture is what you encourage to grow. We all know there's crazy thinking out there in DEI, and companies are being ruined by a wrong approach to all of that. But within the sphere that you have control over, you're encouraging a culture. There's a culture amongst the three of us. We've been together all morning. We've been encouraging each other and speaking to each other. There's a culture that arises. It's what is encouraged to grow. You're the senior pastor at Coral Ridge and CEO of all the ministries, and so you're encouraging a certain culture. I've watched you. You're encouraging, you're challenging, you're asking questions, you're probing. There's a culture of honesty and integrity and let's go and let's do this. So each person needs to recognize that they can't fix the macro culture, perhaps. They can't take over the entire company. But, for example, Cracker Barrel going through some crises right now, but there's a local manager who has an ability to alter the culture just within that local branch, or maybe just the shift of one restaurant, the shift supervisor. They have the ability to encourage the right things to grow to the glory of God. And that's how we have to think. Have the influence we can have, where we can have it, and don't feel like we have to be responsible for the macro.
That's awesome.
So maybe shifting gears just slightly, it is highly stressful in the leadership roles. We know that outside influences, internal pressure, your publicly traded company, you're trying to hit profits, etc. And burnout can be fast and approach in the dark at night. You've written a lot about how to create a rhythm, a balance. I remember your words on Churchill, and he never sat still, but his recharge was hobbies, right? Not napping, as an example. So do you have advice of what you've seen great leaders and a great leader such as yourself on how to create that rhythm of balance to prevent the burnout in this chaotic type of a workforce?
Yeah, there's a principle that's in some words of Paul that I see most really powerful leaders who are Christians living out and that I try to live out. Paul said to the Corinthians, I will not boast beyond the field assigned to me. This field includes you. Well, it becomes obvious that Paul knew, and by the way, the Greek word is metron. We get our word meter from it. So there's an actual sort of invisible measured space that is his sphere of responsibility, right? So in my life, it includes my wife, it includes my kids, it includes homes, it includes whatever, it includes my businesses. In other words, there is a field that you should be able to define as an effective leader that you are responsible for every season in your life. If you get beyond that field, stress and burnout happens because you don't have enough grace to manage beyond what God's assigned to you. If you are doing less than what that field is, well, you're not growing, you're not increasing because you're not at the very borders of what's been assigned to you. So I challenge leaders all the time in conferences and counseling and seminars. I want you, for every season of your life, to be able to define the field assigned to you. And don't let anyone push you outside of that. Now, this includes, by the way, practical things like taking care of yourself and getting exercise and all of that kind of thing, tending your romantic life and what have you. But most of the CEOs who get into trouble have gone way beyond what there is actually assigned to them. And I mean by God, includes their job, includes their home life. They've gone way beyond it. And so as a result, there's stress, there's burnout, there are health problems. But if you'll stay, as the old Sunday school thing is, stay under the spout where the glory comes out. That's what we teach the kids. Stay where God's grace is for you and man and guard those boundaries, cause everything to flourish within that field. Then you'll see growth and you'll see development, but you won't have the stress and burnout that leads, by the way, to all kinds of immorality and all kinds of medicating and all kinds of disaster. That's the principle I've seen work the best.
Great advice.
Stephen, when I introduced you by many titles, one of them being a senior fellow for the Institute for Faith and Culture. And you've really been on the ground floor ever since we launched the Institute out of Coral Ridge almost 3 years ago now. And one of the main areas of emphasis, in particularly the last year, has been really helping young, rising entrepreneurs, Christian executives in the marketplace in the South Florida region, help them think through how do you integrate your faith and your virtues into your marketplace? Why are ministries like this, initiatives and programs where we're reaching out to the next generation of Christian leaders and saying, your faith matters, but it not only matters on Sunday morning, but it matters on Monday morning? Why is this so important for the church in the 21st century?
Well, to start negatively, the church for a long time ignored people in the marketplace, ignored people in business. Come in, sit down, behave yourself, write a check. That basically was the message to the business community. And I really want to commend you, Rob, and commend Coral Ridge, because it's rare that you have a church of these kinds of means, this kind of influence, saying, look, you are called just as surely as I am. You and I believe that Chad is called just as surely as clergy are, just as surely as ordained people are, called to the marketplace, called to serve, called to do what he's doing. And so what you're doing is you're calling these people in the marketplace to step up and accept the calling of God on their life. It's essential. The young especially are desperate for it. They don't believe in this divided kind of existence. Sunday morning is God's involved, but God's not involved on Monday morning when I'm at my business. They want it all integrated, and they're right, because that is the way God created us. So I'm really thrilled with what the Institute's doing, really thrilled with what you are doing and all of your work, and grateful because I think we can change a generation with this.
Well, I mean, it's been absolutely fabulous having you, Stephen. I mean, the amount of advice that we got in these short few minutes will go a long, long way as we cast a wide net within the business community, as Rob said, not just here in South Florida, but men and women all over the country and, quite frankly, all over the globe. And that's really a mission, right? And so we look forward to having you back and getting more of your thoughts over time. You've always blessed us with those, and we're excited about the future together.
It's a blast to be with you. I can't wait to be with you again.
Thank you, Stephen. And that's all the time we have for the Redeeming Work podcast. This is a monthly podcast produced by the Institute for Faith and Culture and Coral Ridge Ministries. This is a podcast that is dedicated to helping equip Christian leaders integrate their faith in the workplace. You can find this podcast and other resources at both watch.crm.tv and institutefc.org. We pray that you would pass this along to another Christian leader that is desiring to integrate their faith in the workplace. And we'll see you right back here next time on the Redeeming Work podcast.